This is the Real Health Podcast brought to you by Riordan Clinic. Our mission is to bring you the latest information and top experts in functional and integrative medicine to help you make informed decisions on your path to real health.
So welcome everyone. This is Dr. Ron Hunninghake. This is the Real Health Podcast, another episode. And I'm pleased to have as my guest today, Mr. Ryan Sternagel. Ryan, welcome. And I'm pleased to hear that you as a family went through, well, it's not pleasing, but you went through some difficult times, but it was an impetus for you to transform you and your family into a more integrative lifestyle. I mean, big picture integrative lifestyle. And I was wondering if you would share a little bit of that story with our listening audience.
Yeah, it was Lord works in mysterious ways type situation, I suppose, Dr. Ron.
Sure.
I was just thinking about the other day. Our son Ryder. My wife is Teddy, and our son Ryder was diagnosed just before his first birthday, 11 days before his first birthday to be exact, with stage 4 neuroblastoma, which is a typically a childhood cancer of the nervous system. So he had my wife found it because there was a big lump sticking out of his back. And then we went through the I know it's not unique to a lot of people who have been through this sort of thing, but had a hard time getting a diagnosis in the first place. Took him to, and we were, you mentioned transformed to an integrative. We were, nowhere near what we are today, but ate mostly organic food and was already, doing the getting rid of EMF thing and getting rid of chemicals in the house and all that stuff. So we were already pretty far down that road, which was, again, then when we did get a stage 4 cancer diagnosis for our 1-year-old, was like a why us type of thing. So we had actually taken him to a naturopath at first, a naturopathic doctor, pediatrician, who we felt pretty good about, but for some reason got the, a lot of things started adding up at that point. But he had a lump sticking out of his back, which was concerning. But then we started thinking, well, he's also not only not walking just before his first birthday, but not even really crawling. Barely even able to roll around on the floor, and he had leg movement before, but then it kind of went away, and he's not really keeping anything down eating wise and all this stuff. So, we felt the lump on the back and all this stuff starts adding up in our heads, and end up getting a referral for speech therapy for the keeping things down part, and physical therapy for the not walking stuff. And it's like, come on, he's got a lump in his back. Something's going on here. And
so you weren't getting any help with thinking about what had caused this. It was more like, we're going to try to fix this, we're going to try to fix that, but no understanding of the underlying factors that may have contributed to this.
Yeah. And, it's almost like I would, we shouldn't have brought up the other things, because then that, I don't know. Anyway, that didn't really sit well with us. We pressed for a referral to the local hospital that sees children. Got in there. That guy told us we thought it was a doctor we were talking to at first, turned out to be a nurse's assistant, physician's assistant, excuse me. And, he told us to come back in 6 weeks if the lump was still there. And, I think that was on a Friday. And by Monday we were calling back saying, look, there is a lump in our son's back. My wife had already basically, Dr. Googled, diagnosed him with neuroblastoma at that point. Just from, mother's intuition and clicking around, and everyone says, don't do the Dr. Google thing. But a lot of times you get a lot further with that than the medical establishment, unfortunately. They kind of humored us with an ultrasound, and then the ultrasound did reveal that there was some sort of mass in there, and then so they had us come back for an MRI a couple of days later, And yeah, we'll never forget when we got the MRI, when the doctor and the nurse, they said it would be like a half hour. We were waiting, half hour passed, hour and a half passed. Probably close to a couple hours later, the doctor and the nurse came back, and they both had tears in their eyes. And then they gave us the news that he had, stage 4 neuroblastomas. There was a large mass growing inside of his spine and out of it. And it was basically all just interwoven throughout his spinal cord. He had a couple secondary tumors and metastasis to his hip bones. So yeah, that was the start of our journey. Yeah.
Did you go much further in terms of conventional therapy, in terms of chemo or anything like that, or is this the point where you said, "My gosh, what are the deeper causes here, and what else can we do to help him heal?"
No, I mean, yeah, we were, like I said, we were already fairly savvy to the fact that there was other stuff that you could be doing besides chemo, but then also weren't necessarily opposed to doing some chemo if it turned out to be the right thing. So we, and we were kind of a little fiery and not, getting frustrated with the answers we were getting, all that stuff. But we ended up saying we'd like a second opinion before before launching into whatever treatment program that they wanted to give us, because they were actually ready to start him on chemo before exactly even knowing what the diagnosis was, before the biopsy came back, before they got the pathology back. They just wanted to get him into chemo yesterday. And it's like, well, come on, guys, you're the same guys that were telling us to come back in 6 weeks. And now you're telling us he needs to be in chemo yesterday. Can't we have a day to figure this out? And so we got the biopsy in the hospital. We did get a PICC line put in. Mm-hmm. The reason being, one, if we did decide to do chemo, then he would, we'd be ready to do it. But then two, obviously we were already researching IV vitamin C and all these different IV therapies and even IPT and all these sorts of things. So figured, well, what the heck, let's get the line put in. That way, if we find somebody that's able to do IV vitamin C and these sorts of things, we just have it set up and ready to go. And so we got the line put in, brought him home, and then and I think it was the next night, not the night after, but the next night. Ryder ended up Teddy was sleeping next to my wife, or sleeping with both of us in bed, and all of a sudden Teddy noticed that he was burning up in the middle of the night, and we didn't know what was going on, but yeah, he had 100-something crazy high fever. I forget what it was. It started puking all over the place and stuff coming out of both ends, and we didn't know what was going on. So that was 90 miles an hour back to the hospital we had just left, and turned out he had gotten an infection, bloodstream staph infection, when he got that line in. So at that point, we're in the hospital on IV antibiotics and all that stuff, trying to clear the infection. It's going to be a while. All of our dreams about traveling to Mexico or something like that to get him treated were kind of out the window at that point. And so we did consent to doing a round of chemo, because we did know we needed to shrink that tumor in a hurry, because it was, that they were telling us originally that they didn't even know, even if he survived the cancer, if he would ever walk, because there was, so much obvious nerve damage going on. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, we weren't dogmatically, we're not going to do chemo at all, especially given the circumstances. So we did a round and took him home and thought that was it. And we were going to be going back to doing our holistic research and all that stuff. And that this was a few weeks later, get a knock on the door from Child Protective Services. And apparently the hospital had called them like right after we left the first time and said, we're going to go get a second opinion. And then, just being the government, it took them a few weeks to actually get around to following up on the case. But yeah, at that point it became clear that, if we didn't keep playing ball and do exactly what the standard of care was, then there was, that they would intervene, as they put it. And so then it became a choice of, well, do we lose our kid, or do we do the best job integratively we can? And So yeah, we did a few more rounds of chemo. Had actually, and in the meantime, doing everything we could. Right.
That's where you really opened the book up and started looking at your home, the environmental toxins, food. There's so many variables, and when we start talking to our patients about toxicity and environmental factors, it's becoming a really long list. But you evidently started looking at everything.
Well, yeah, and that's been a really big thing for us. As it should be for everyone, but especially your 1-year-old son you get told that your 1-year-old son was essentially born with cancer. And that makes you think, and it gets you thinking real hard about your environment. So yeah, I mean, even though we had done a pretty good job of getting rid of all the, chemical things in our lives and that sorts of things, by our standards today, it wasn't a great job, or by our standards, the next day it was right. it wasn't a great job, because we still found a whole garbage bag full of stuff that we just is this
the Stern method where you went over? Was that the birth of the Stern method, where you began to really look deeply into these factors?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the Stern method, fun fact, our brand name was originally My Kid Cures Cancer. And then when we started getting bigger, we got some advice that you might not want to run around with Cures Cancer in your brand name. So we changed it to the Stern method, which was kind of born out of, our last name Sternagel, but that's hard to say or remember. And the method part essentially just came from the fact that we knew my wife and I are not inherently organized people, right? But we realized that when we started learning about everything we need to check off the list in terms of completely detoxifying our life from all chemicals, electromagnetic fields, potential mold exposures, just all the things that any off-gassing material, it could be coming from a mattress, just keep on going. Anything that could be potentially toxic relationships in your life, completely detoxifying everything on that front. And then that's only the detoxification part, right? Then you have the internal detoxification and learning all about that, and the different. There's binders, and there's things that upregulate your phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification pathways, and there's more holistic thing, like things that go in and liver support and all these, and that's detoxification. But then there's working with a naturopathic doctor, working with your regular oncologist, working with an energy healer, all the the chiropractor, the acupuncturist, all these things. And so it just became, and then trying to pack in everything you can into a day, right? You hear that getting out in the sun is good. You hear that getting in the woods is good. The forest bathing studies, I came upon those early on. And so it's like, okay, we immediately got him an infrared sauna, and we had him in that every day. And so it was really, I guess that's where the method part came from, was, okay, we're not really inherently super organized, type A type people, but we need to make ourselves those types of people.
Well, and most patients aren't, and most patients who are dealing with an acute phase of a chronic illness, they are overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. And so this is what intrigues me about your method, is that I think people who are coming on to the integrative approach to dealing with cancer or any complex chronic illness, this part is a very important part, but they kind of stumble into it, like it sounds like you did. But I think the fact that you've organized a very comprehensive method could be of great value to many people.
Yeah, and we're still formalizing that in the form of a course that should be out pretty soon here. But in the meantime, I mean, it's, there's lots of you can see all the categorization type stuff we do in some of the resource sections on our site. But between the website and the full blown course, I mean, I just always tell people, take it easy on yourself. You don't. There's a reason you don't learn everything overnight, and there's no reason you should have to learn all of this overnight. Although the quicker you can get your act together, the better. But just we were really big on checklists, right, and like scheduling things, and actually getting out your hourly, on your phone or your computer, or written out on the fridge, whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, we kind of had both things going on, right? We had the every time we adjusted the supplement routine, we had the before meal supplements, the before breakfast supplements, the with breakfast supplements, the empty stomach between breakfast and lunch. Just try to figure out what that whole thing's about, and stuck it on the fridge. And we lived by that supplement schedule on the fridge, and just reprinted it out every time we made a change in the supplement protocol. And I was listening to podcasts continually, along with working with it's what I also tell people is just make sure to get out there, for the love of God, work with a naturopathic oncologist and an integrative MD, but somebody that actually specializes in cancer, right? Like the type of stuff you guys do there, Dr. Ron.
Yeah.
Not just any old naturopathic doctor that happened to help you with your gut a while back or something like that. I mean, anytime our naturopathic oncologist made a change in the schedule, we change it there. But again, I wasn't stopping there. I was listening to health podcasts nonstop, and then I'd have a little checklist app on my phone. And every time I heard something, kind of that, I really need to be incorporating that, I'd make a note of it real quick on my phone so I didn't forget. And then I'd just set aside a little time, like each and every night, to go over that list and say, okay, what did I learn today? Okay, here's the 5 things I need to incorporate into the routine, or change about our household environment, or supplement I want to look into, or whatever. And how am I going to incorporate those into the routine? Is it a thing that I need to, maybe I just found out about a detox bath. It's like, okay, then where are we going to fit a detox bath into the weekly routine on top of all the other stuff? And just setting that time aside every night to make sure you get it done, and you add it to the routine, or you make whatever change you want to make about your house or your life or whatever. And you start over again the next day and learn something new and work it in.
You went all in. You went all in. You and your wife, you went all in on this. And I think a lot of patients hear about this and they start, and then they get lost in the morass of the number of things that need to be done. But putting it into a checklist, making it systematic, and then going all in. Tell us, we don't have a lot of time, but I know they're going to wonder, the audience is going to wonder, how did your son do? What was the process of healing that this kind of all-in environmental recontextualization, how did that affect your son's health?
Yeah. It was a wild ride there for a couple of years, for sure. The not eating thing actually turned out to be, in addition to the stage 4 neuroblastoma, he was actually, it turned out when we got the first scans, they came back, somebody from cardiac came in and said, by the way, we were looking at your son's scans, and he also has a double aortic arch. We're usually born with one aorta, and he has 2, and they're wrapped around his esophagus and his trachea and compressing. So we're like, at the time, we're like, well, is it life-threatening to him right now? Like, no, you'll just have to deal with it later. And we're like, okay, just thank you for letting us know, get out of our room now, sort of thing. But yeah, so we ended up, it got real ugly with the hospital. They got more and more controlling, and the story kept changing on how much chemo he's going to need, and what control we did have in it, what say we had in it, and all these things. And we we ended up, we were on the way home from a particularly nasty appointment, and my wife just looked at me in the car and said, "Should we move to Utah?" My wife and I both grew up in Washington State. That's where Ryder was born, and we had Utah in mind for maybe we'll move there someday for one reason or another, but as far as the reasoning here was it's both a kind of a natural health friendly state and less of a government all up in your business type state. And we figured anywhere's got to be better than here. Let's roll the dice. And she said, "Should we move to Utah?" I said yes. And we were gone a week and a half later. It's where we live to this day. But yeah, so we did our last round. He was scheduled for another round when we got here. We did do that round, and then he was about halfway through the kind of the intro standard of care at that point, kind of his minimum standard protocol. And we, they were the team we landed on was entirely different. We told them we'd like to back off, and they weren't exactly 100% comfortable with it, but said, you guys are the parents and you know best, and we're here to support you, and we will take a wait and see approach. It's like that makes a lot of sense, right? We're not doing chemo again, no way, no how, but let's take a wait and see approach and see if that happened to be enough for Ryder. Obviously that's, where they were coming from. Where we were coming from is we're going to do everything under the sun with all the holistic stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, we just kept going crazy on energy medicine devices, sauna, kept up with the IV protocol, 50 different supplements at one time, juicing. We ended up talking about going all in. We bought a piece of land with kind of zero EMF on the property, and ended up building a house from the ground up with non-toxic materials, just because we were that paranoid about our environment. And so that's been a really neat part of the journey. And anyway, the mass kept shrinking on its own after I wouldn't say on its own, but without the help of conventional treatment. And he's still got a bit of a remaining mass there, just maybe a couple percentage points of what the size of what it was to start, but it hasn't lit up in years. And pretty happy, calling that scar tissue at this point. And yeah, he's, feel good calling him cancer free. We still stay on our protocol, all that stuff. He was also diagnosed with autism along the way. We believe due to the treatment and the sedation and the contrast from the MRI, all that stuff, which actually was pretty substantial autism when he was diagnosed at 3. Worked through that, same thing, detoxification, nutrition, healing the body, all that stuff. And now he's I don't know. I call him a slightly quirky savant because he's a genius, but kind of most of the negative autism symptoms would be, you wouldn't really know. And what else? We got the heart surgery taken along, figured out along the way. We didn't like that. We moved to Utah for the cancer, and they were great for the cancer. We didn't like them for the heart surgery. So we ended up flying across the country to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We found the best guy in the country for that particular double aorta situation, and got that done there. And yeah. So it's been, and then along the way, we started posting everything. And I'd say that's another big thing that people should hear, is we started posting everything we were doing for fundraising, because we went really, 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 really hard talking about going all the way on the fundraising stuff. And just, reaching out, asking for discounts everywhere we could. And just really, because that's a big factor too for people, right? Is just how are we going to afford all this stuff? And that was another substantial portion of my day. Each and every day was just, reaching out to people, asking them to share our online fundraiser, reaching out to people, the local grocery store, asking for discounts on produce so we could get more juicing on them, just everything we could. But anyway, we started posting his journey along the way, and that led to a following, and that led to a website and a podcast and more social media stuff. And then the day job went away unexpectedly, and we took it as a sign from the big guy to go full time on our mission, even though we were probably making about $20 a month on the website, and we at the time and had maybe 2 months 2 months runway before we couldn't pay any bills, and we made that work too. And it's been the full time thing, helping, getting to help people make it a little easier on the cancer journey than it was for us. Yeah.
Ryan, it's amazing the power of love, parental love, and all that you've done to save your son and all the various steps. And there's no question that when people start getting into natural medicine, integrative medicine, whatever term you want to use, it's a transformational force in a person's life. And your story just demonstrates that. And so I certainly do encourage our listeners to check out the sternmethod.com to hear more about it, to get more details, and to of course, I'm intrigued with the checklist, because so much of this it's hard to reorientate. When people get a bad diagnosis, they have to go through all kinds of reorientation. And so something like this, I think, would be very helpful to them. But thank you again for your tenacity as a parent to save your son's life, and the things that you've learned and what you've gained in terms of knowledge about health and improving the quality of the environment that we live in order to help the healing process of the body. I think that's a very important part of this. So thank you so much for being on our show, and we wish you the very best and hope your son continues to thrive, and that that you connect with a lot of people, because I know this is important stuff for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Appreciate it, Dr. Ron. And anyone listening out there that is going through anything similar. There is always something else you can do.
Yeah.
We'll put it that way.
Good way to put it. Yeah. Don't give up. All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. And we'll end it here for the Riordan podcast, the Real Health podcast. That's real health, what you've done for yourselves and your family. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ron. Thank you for everything you guys do over there as well. It's much needed work, and I've been a fan for a long time.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to the Real Health podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. You can also find all of the episodes and show notes over at realhealthpodcast.org. Also, be sure to visit riordanclinic.org, where you will find hundreds of videos and articles to help you create your own version of real health.